Welcome back. The Bellhaven Harm Reduction Centre in Greyville provides methadone to approximately 500 people with drug use problems. The opioid substitute helps alleviate the side effects associated with heroin use. It also helps with a range of clinical and harm reduction services. The centre was featured in a short film which is part of the Better Cities Film Festival in Detroit, United States this week. The Better Cities Film Festival collects, curates and presents the very best films on the theme of making better cities, towns and neighborhoods. To discuss this further, we are now joined by the researcher at the Durban University of Technology, Professor Monique Marks. Professor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Hi, good to be here.
Let's talk about, methadone, which is provided to 500 people with drug use problems. What does it mean and what does it do?
Okay, so just to make a quick correction, at Bellhaven Harm Reduction Centre we see roughly about 160 people a day, but there have been about 500 people that have accessed services at Bellhaven Harm Reduction Centre. So methadone is an opiate substitute. It sort of works on your opiate receptor in much the same way as heroin does, but it's a medication that is tested and it's safe. And it's used to deal with withdrawal symptoms so that when people are wanting to either reduce their use of illicit or other forms of opiates, it assists in, I suppose, having a similar effect to what other opiates like heroin would. And therefore it reduces the withdrawal symptoms and sometimes takes them away completely. As people move forward, once they've gone past the period of dealing with the withdrawals, they can opt either to stay on methadone for as long as they need to. It then becomes almost like a chronic medication. And I think it's important that people understand that opiate substitutes are a chronic medication that people should have access to. Currently in South Africa, it's very, very difficult to get hold of opiate substitutes. Methadone is one of them. There are others. And that's because it's not currently on the essential drug list.
I mean, is it any different to the traditional, harm reduction drugs that have been used in the past?
I don't know what you mean by traditional harm reduction drugs, but it is one of medications that is recommended by the World Health Organization in terms of dealing with opioid use disorders. So I'm not sure what you mean by traditional. I suppose the difference between the sort of conventional rather than traditional way of dealing with drug use is a push towards abstinence. And that's not what we do at Bellhaven Harm Reduction Centre. What we do is we respect the fact that people, are at in different pathways in their lives, and their life goals may be different. So what we do at Bellhaven is to assist people to achieve their goals in terms of normalizing their life. So what the medication does is it really provides a platform for people to be able to achieve in their life what they would see as normal. So that could be looking after your kids, being educated, being a good son or daughter to your parents, looking after your health and hygiene, taking care of yourself through keeping on chronic medication, whatever normal means to somebody is what we work with. Some people will choose abstinence. In fact, many people do choose abstinence, but some people choose to reduce their drug use dramatically to allow them to live a fairly normal life. And that is also seen as a positive goal. Now, that's very different from imposing abstinence on people and expecting people to just abstain. What we find is that using harm reduction, which is the approach which is not stigmatizing and is about accompanying people on their journey, works far better than abstinence does. And we see that at Bellhaven because we see so many people having been through so-called rehabilitation centres, forced into an abstinence state. It doesn't work, particularly with a drug like heroin. And then they come into Bellhaven and they get the right medical assistance and their lives transform. And that's why I think Bellhaven has got such a lot of attention nationally and internationally. So really what we're doing is following very strong evidence in terms of dealing with drug use disorders. What we're doing in Durban is done all over the world, but it's not done very commonly in South Africa because we still have an abstinence prohibition approach to drug use.
And having said that, Professor, I mean, we've heard cases of so many drug users relapsing to drug use after going through treatment and after having been clean for some time, and they end up going back to drug use. So does methadone help in a way insofar as behavioral change? Does it, deter the drug users from using drugs in the future?
Of course it does, because it really has a similar effect to what, for example, heroin would have. It just doesn't give you the same high, but it certainly does stabilize your mood. And it does have a similar effect because, remember, it's operating on your opiate receptor in a similar way to which other opiates like heroin do. It's just much safer, it's clinically tested, and it's regulated. And it's the fact that it's regulated very, very important, because what we have is street drugs that are not regulated. And unfortunately, people don't really know what they're putting into their bodies. But so methadone really, really does help with that. And when you talk about clean and not clean, we don't really use those words, because the assumption then is that somebody who chooses a life of active drug use is not a good or a clean person, which is not necessarily so. When we think about people who have a serious drug use disorder, it's usually because there's been some kind of trauma or disconnect that has happened in their lives. And really, it's about getting beyond that, surface stuff into the trauma and disconnect to make sense of what's going on and that has driven the drug use disorder. Now, methadone, in a way, provides the clarity in people's minds to be able to deal with the underlying reason that gives rise to drug use as a solution to an already existing problem. So I think what we would say as people in the harm reduction movement is that drugs are a solution to a already existing problem. And therefore, it's sort of incumbent upon us to try and make sense of what the real problem is. And methadone, as I said before, is a platform for trying to do that.
Now, Professor Marks, I suppose then it's only prudent that we should start interrogating the reason why people relapse. I mean, if they've been off a particular drug and then they start using it again, what could possibly be the trigger? Is it social issues? Is it economic issues or mental health issues, perhaps? It's
very, very dependent on individuals. I mean, what we do know, though, is that if you speak to people who do have a serious drug use disorder, you will find somewhere along the pathway of their life that there has been some major trauma that has happened, or some real disconnect with people that are part of their closest family or friendship networks. So, the trigger to people, if you want to call it relapsing, that's fine. But the triggers could be, for example, somebody is doing really well in their journey to normalization. I'm going to put it that way rather than being clean. And they think that they're going to be able to sort of reintegrate into their family or into the sort of labor market. And then what they find is they're actually rejected when they go back home because, there's a lack of trust. And that leads to, a sense of failure, I guess, and that can lead to back into drug use. And the other thing, of course, is that people reach a point where they're feeling like they're doing much better, and then there's no way of creating meaning in their lives because the job market is so restricted. And I think, I use this term, the burden of the future, because I think many young people, a lot of young people in South Africa, particularly Black South African young people, look into the future and it looks not very positive because there's so few life opportunities. And I think that it's that burden of the future that we really need to be acknowledging, not just the burden of the past. The burden of the past we speak about a lot, and that's apartheid and colonialism and all the other stuff that we so glibly speak about. But we don't speak about the burden of the future. And it's that burden of the future that I think can trigger, going back into problematic drug use. Having said that, a medication like methadone and other opiate substitutes can really play a big role in helping people not to go back to sort of the kinds of substance use that they had previously. And that's really important. We join a sort of advocacy campaign to get these medications onto the essential drug list and to get more centres like Bellhaven operational, because we do know how effective it is. And you were speaking about behavioural change. It's massive. So once you're on a medication like methadone, for example, you're not spending your days trying to get your next heroin fix every 4 to 6 hours, which means that you then out of the criminal justice system. It means that you're likely to be able to, reconnect as much as possible with family and friends. It means that you start taking care of yourself and going back onto chronic medication, for example, for HIV and TB. And those are the kinds of radical changes we see with the clients that access services at Bellhaven. So the quality of life changes are very, very significant.
All right, Professor Marks, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we have to end it there. But thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. All right, that was Professor Monique Marks, a researcher at the Durban University of Technology.